Hi everyone, this is Obian Chidozie and we are continuing with our videos in this channel, A to Z Psychology with Obian Chidozie. You are welcome back, and today we are going to be talking about a very interesting course as a student of psychology and as a final student of psychology. We are going to be talking about psychological testing 1. This course features in first semester and features also in second semester. So psychological testing 1, psychological testing and test construction 1, and psychological test and test construction 2. So you will be having a lot of understanding about what is psychological test, what is assessment, and every other thing in this semester. All those type of instruments or test instruments, you'll be seeing them here, and then next semester you will be expected to at least know how to use some of them, how to see them in action, or it can also be a continuation of other tests you might not have been exposed to. Now, we are talking about psychological tests. As a clinical psychologist or as a psychologist, we know that psychological tests are not enough to talk about your person. That there are a lot of other areas we look at that helps us to understand individuals, right? So that's why it's very important we first talk about psychological assessment. Psychological assessment is a bigger term, right? It's a bigger term that covers all the assessment protocols, right? It covers we use it to assess individuals' mental abilities, their behaviors, their should I say interests, their personality, their intelligence. In fact, everything accessible about you is done here. Where are you from? How was your childhood? What is your IQ level? That is intelligent cognitive situation, right? All of those things are under this assessment. So you will discover that when we talk about psychological testing or tests, you will see that all psychological tests are under psychological assessment, but psychological assessment is a bigger umbrella that covers more than psychological tests. Now, there are 4 principal areas we assess when we are doing psychological assessment. There are 4 areas or 4 types of psychological assessments in which psychological test is one, right? So, what are the 4 areas? One is the behavioral observations. That will come next semester. Next semester, you do a lot of mental status examination. We want to see how you look. People's dressing shows you who is under drugs and who is not. Even the way they walk. We check their hair, whether it's well kept, whether women or not women, whether their clothes are neat, whether they are still good in taking care of themselves, even their fingernails, the way they smile, their mood, is it flattened, the way they walk, oh boy, they have a lot to say, right? So that is behavioral observation. I'm just trying to give that idea. Then the second one is clinical interview. Clinical interview is also a case of next semester in psychological testing 2. You also engage in that next semester. You see a lot. Who is your the parents, your relationship with your parents? Have you been in a lot of questions? And the clinical interview will have those things. Is your father dead or alive? If dead, what killed him? And was he a drug user? When did he stop school? What was your relationship with him? If your mother this and that, is he a drug user? If he died, what killed him or what killed her? And all of those things. What of your siblings? What is your relationship with them? Have you been in prison before? Have you been sick before? What was your childhood when you were born? Please, next semester. Number 3 we are having is the neurological assessments. Also, it's a part of that is the 3rd protocol, part of the protocol assessment protocol. The neurological is when we are now checking your brain situations, your brain activities, so that we know whether there is one of the wire that have detached, or a part of the brain that is malfunctioning. Let me use that word. So this is where we consider the MRIs of this world, the CAT computer-assisted tomography, the position emission tomography, the magnetic resonance imaging, the functional magnetic resonance imaging, the electroencephalographs, and what have you, right? And the fourth one is psychological testing. And this is where we now use psychological instruments to investigate you and know what's up, right? We can check your interest here. We can check psychological disorders here. We can check your attitudes. We can check your behaviors in terms of your interests, your hobbies. Yeah, that's kind of our personality, right? So now, what is psychological tests, or what is psychological testing? This is a process of using a psychological test or using of a psychological instrument to quantify a particular behavior, or it will help us to understand a behavior, either to predict a behavior, to assess it, to have a good understanding about that behavior. That is the major thing. To obtain an aspect of a behavior, one thing we do is we try to operationalize a particular behavior. And in operationalizing it, psychological instruments or tests helps us to do what? Assess the presence or absence or the level of that behavior or that aspect of behavior in every individual. So when we talk about psychological tests, they can be in terms of scales like questionnaires. They can be in ways like other bigger instruments, right? Calibrated and scaled, normed instruments, right? Which we are going to be discussing soon. Most of them come with items. Please, it's important we know that we have items, right? When we hear the word item, it's simply those questions asked in the questionnaire, for example. They are those stimulus you respond to, right? So that is that. And the behavior, we should understand also that psychological tests can assess could be overt or covert, right? Overt or covert. Now, at this point, what are the type of tests we have? I will give you a little rundown to have a general understanding of tests. Then we'll come down concluding with the kind of tests that you are supposed to be exposed in this course. So, because as a final student, or at this point trying to understand what we're talking about in psychological tests, we not necessarily, if you have watched me, I'm not necessarily trying to tell you what psychological assessment conceptually or define psychological testing, right? But I've at least pointed it out. With other videos, we know that we try to check individuals' thought patterns, their emotions, their behaviors, their aspects of behavior, their interests, their hobbies. These instruments are able to tap into those things and get them. Now, what are they? The types we have. We have the ones we call individual tests, group tests, right? From the name, we know there are tests we can administer individually and the one we administer group by group, right? Like we have MMPI is individual, VESHLA is individual, ESINC, personality inventory is individual, and so on, right? Then the group instruments, we have in 945 Robert Yates alpha tests and beta tests. The alpha for the literate group, AMI test, and then the beta test is for the non-literate. Please, not the illiterates, right? Because they are not illiterates. As much as they cannot read or write doesn't mean they are all intelligent or they are non-literates, right? Then so that is then we have other type of tests we call the ability tests. This one want to check your ability. There are ones that are time sensitive, and there are ones that are made. We call that one like speed test. Speed tests are always very big, right? Like what I mean, like long is easy, but few time. They will want to. Many people do not finish, are not able to finish speed test. It's hard to finish speed test, but they want to check how fast and how long you will go with ease, right? But it takes for the time to take you to execute that. And then the next we look at is when we are talking about power test. Also, is another ability test. This one is power test is more difficult, but they give you time. In power test, it's more difficult, but you are given time. Then achievement test, at this situation, like your exam, achievement test want to check your performance in your exams and know like residual memories, the memory existing, how far have you gone as a student and everything, or as a trainee in a particular situation. Then the other way around, we look at aptitude tests. Example of aptitude tests, we have GRE, we call it graduate record exam. We have scholastic aptitude tests also, the opposite UTME, right? These are exams that are not checking what you have achieved or what you know already, your memory, but they are checking how, if you have, as one of the ability tests, they are also interested to know if you have the ability to go through such a training. Like you are preparing for university school, are you ready for that? Are you having the qualities to engage in that? That is what aptitude tests are interested. If you go through a training or like enter let's say a job, they expect that your aptitude test should reflect the fact that if you are trained to use a machine, for example, to use an instrument or to engage in customers, you are able to do all of those things. Aptitude test takes care of that. Then what other things? We have intelligent tests. Intelligent tests look at your problem solving abilities, your adaptability, your versatility. That is, do you profit from previous experiences and everything. Personality tests also, on the other hand, look at your interests, your traits, your typical behaviors, your traits, your temperaments, right? Now, we going down to what we are in for today, the objective and projective tests. What are they? The objective tests are these tests we refer to as the ones that have standardized way of scoring, administration, and interpretation. They are well calibrated. They have, you see the ones that are dichotomous, the ones that are in Likert scales like multidimensional response format. Their scoring formats, your way of responding to them is already outlined. And the way it will be interpreted, independent of whoever is going to interpret it, no matter the clinician, right? It is outlined. Nobody is going to use their own bias or their own expertise. The only expertise you need to have is two. One, the expertise about psychological testing, and two, the expertise about that particular, how to interpret the instrument, how to administer, score, and interpret. The other way around, projective tests do not have a stipulated way of responding, interpreting, scoring, and interpretation. Often they could have even scoring. No, yeah, these are under projective tests. We have Wechsler Adult Intelligence Test, for example, is an objective test. MMPI is an objective test. We're going to be looking at them. Then under the projective tests, you would have called it subjective tests, because the responses are subjective to how subject to how the client or the test taker views or perceives it. And then it's not this response now, the scoring and interpretation of those responses as submitted by the client is also subject to the expertise and the ability of the clinician on how he or she understood what the client has submitted. You start making, you see there are a lot of subjective, but we don't call them subjective most times, right? Key feature of objective instruments are that their reliability and validity is very high, right? So reasons why we call subjective projective tests are something we'll talk about in the next video, and this is the size of the video. Thank you very much.